Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, an honest edition. It's Moon Crystal, brought to us by Hect. Moon Crystal is a Famicom exclusive that did seem to have plans to come to North America, though it never ended up happening. The developer, Hect, really never ended up releasing any games outside of Japan, though they did end up making games all the way up until the year 2000. With emulation becoming so popular, Moon Crystal was discovered and it got a cult following in North America, Europe, and elsewhere. The game was quickly fan-translated, and that's the version I will be playing here today, and overall Moon Crystal is one of those Famicom exclusives that's well worth checking out. After the opening cutscene introducing us to our main character of Ricky Slater, we then get our title screen with Moon Crystal, and once you press start you'll get more story before finally getting control of your character in the first level. Moon Crystal was released pretty late in the NES or Famicom life cycle, so it has some pretty nice graphics, colorful backgrounds, and especially fluid animation when it comes to the main character and a lot of the game's enemies. It's kind of one of those Prince of Persia-esque games with that animation that you can see almost every frame of the character, even turning them around in a quick moment while running. You'll slide back and forth with that momentum. It's something that takes a bit to get used to for sure, and it makes actually turning around and avoiding enemy attacks, especially bosses, a bit more difficult than it needs to be, but the bosses in general are relatively one of the weaker points of this game, at least in my opinion. Most enemies in the game are taken out with a single hit from your weapon. You can find a variety of power-ups and upgrades throughout the course of levels, such as increasing your health bar like the one I just picked up. You can have 5 hearts in total, though you don't carry these over between levels, and if you die, you lose all of them. The same goes for a lot of the other power-ups, including the sword upgrade, as well as the double jump ability. The bosses in the game are pretty much just a slugfest, and there's really only two strategies that you do for pretty much every boss. Either run in and just mash the attack button. As long as you're close enough, you'll be able to deal a decent amount of damage to them quickly, and if you've gotten a few extra hearts throughout the level, you should have no problem. And the other strategy I'll imply late in the game that involves once you're down to only one heart left, you do a lot more damage, including double or triple damage depending upon where you're able to land an attack. And because of this, a lot of speedruns use this to get through bosses in just a couple of seconds. As we begin level number 2, you have a pretty colorful background here as we're running across this bridge, heading into the village on the opposite side. On this next screen, we're going to start off by climbing up to this platform, jumping up, and being able to grab another one of those heart containers, so we have 4 now, starting off in level 2. Here, we're going to drop on down, take out the enemy, and then grab the sword power-up from the chest. Thankfully, the chests always have the same items every time you play, so it's very easy to know where things are that you're going to want to grab, and ones that you may not necessarily need to, like if you don't need extra health or the like. The only other item that we haven't really found yet is the gem that gives you invulnerability for a small amount of time. Be careful when climbing here that you don't accidentally hit the spikes, but if you're able to jump on the platform and just pull yourself up, you can grab another one of those heart containers, so we have now full 5 hearts. Here, do not attempt to jump to the right. You can kind of get up there sometimes, but it's much easier just to climb to the left so you're able to avoid the enemy. Here, make sure when you drop down on the right side that you're hugging the right wall so you land on the rooftop and are able to make it to the next screen. As soon as we do make it here, we're going to get one of those gems to be invincible, and then we're going to just run through a large part of the next area of the stage. As we make it to the boss encounter here, this boss is a little bit easier, less of a slugfest usually for me. I'm able to deliver a couple of hits, and because he keeps doing that crouching animation, you can get 2 or 3 hits in sometimes before he's able to either attack you or jump over you. As we begin the next level, start off by immediately climbing up the tree branches just above you. Jump to the right and start climbing up this building and pull yourself up, and then jump to the left through the tree branches again to get on top of the roof. If you go all the way to the left, it's another one of those health increases, which I highly recommend grabbing. Every boss in the game pretty much only has 2 attacks. One they do to you when you're up close, and one they do when you're far away, so keep that in mind when you're battling them, and that's why a lot of times the slugfest idea is the best strategy. When you get down here, you want to go to the left and drop down and hit this switch first, and then be able to go over to the right here. That other staircase that we didn't go down just ends up leading to a dead end that we don't need to travel down. Once we drop down here, make sure that you go to the left and grab that chest so that you have the double jump, or else you won't be able to make it through the next couple of platform segments. There may be a way to potentially make those jumps without having the upgrade, but I've never been able to really pull it off. Make sure when you get up here though, you climb up and hit another one of these switches so that we end up having these pulled up and we can continue on the level over to the right. Here we get a little bit of an outside area that we get to kind of run across before heading back into the next building on the right side. Watch out for these grenade thrower guys. As they throw one over our head, we're able to get in close enough in order to deliver an attack. Head on down here, be very careful, wait for this skeleton to go back to the right, and you'll have an opportunity to jump up here and attack him a few times to defeat him before he ends up turning back around and trying to hit you. You can get an extra life in that lower right corner if you need it, but it's a little bit of a tricky jump. Here we have the next boss. Like I said, these bosses are really hard to actually get out of the way of, so a lot of times it really comes down to a slugfest. I'm able to trick him into flying up one time, which is the attack he does when you're farther away from him, and this allows me, when he lands, to get a couple of hits and into a nice position to kind of just slug it out with him to finish him off and move on to the next level. Level number 4 is on a pirate ship. We start off by jumping up a couple of platforms and then the ship takes off. Thankfully the ship's not moving the entire time we're going through this level. You have to be careful of the gaps when you fall through. As you can see, you kind of jump on there. I guess they're cannons on the side of the ship, though there's way too many than there should be, I think. Either way, you can land on those platforms easily. Jump over here to the right, you can grab the sword power up before climbing up. This giant brute up here will jump and do a punch to the pole here, and it'll end up knocking you down to the level right below that, so you gotta quickly climb up in order to avoid. When you climb up here, you can take out the enemy through this before climbing down the opposite side. You can grab this chest for the double jump, which I definitely recommend doing. Be careful when dropping down that you land safely on the cannon or on the platform on the left or right before continuing up the next set of platforms. Be careful of the bird flying overhead before we jump to the top, grab the diamond, and then drop all the way down before heading on inside of the ship itself. Once inside, head down the first staircase that we come to, and we're going to start over to the right here. Here, use your double jump and make sure that you're able to just barely climb on top of a lot of the crates, and eventually you'll make it to another staircase on the far right. Climb up the next one, you'll be back outside on the main part of the ship. Thankfully, we're able to get one of the upgrades here for our health before we end up getting to the boss fight. This is a pretty tricky boss, for sure. Once again, this is another one where doing the jump attack with only 1 health left to you will help out. You're doing double damage with that once you've reached 1 health. It's honestly, though, just a slugfest. Make sure that you're close to him, not exactly on top of him, but if you're too far when you're mashing the attack button, you won't do any damage. So you gotta make sure you're pretty close to him when you're doing this kind of just button mash frenzy in order to try to survive. Level number 5 is inside of a mine. As we begin, you'll have these gargoyle enemies similar to Firebrand from the Ghost and Goblin series. They will kind of swoop down after a few moments, though thankfully much easier than anything Firebrand ever did. As we continue over here to the right, before going to the next screen, grab the power-up, before then avoiding some steam and a robot, and then heading on down. Make sure you grab the other chest and power up, and up here you can get another one of those health increases. Take out this guy and then make a nice jump over to the right. You can grab onto the ledge and continue on the level. On the next screen, be very careful of the boulder that falls down. Every few seconds another boulder will take its place, and you want to quickly climb up on the conveyor belts and get over to the right side. Thankfully, the next segment that has another rock falling, you can just drop on down and head down the stairs. Take out the gargoyle on the left side before dropping down and then jumping onto the conveyor belt. Work your way across a couple of conveyor belts in a row, watching out for some boulders and another gargoyle enemy, before finally safely landing on the opposite side. In this room, take out the enemy below, then jump up and take out the grenade throwing guy, and over to the right you'll find one of those double jump abilities. Drop on down to the next floor, watch out for the steam. When you're doing the double jump, it ends up resetting everything, of course, when you end up landing back on the screen. This can help you avoid some of the enemies, just gotta be careful that when you end up coming back down, you don't immediately land on one of these enemies. Head on over here to the left, you can grab another one of the power-ups for the double jump. In case you didn't get the one earlier, you can also grab that one. Here you can get another sword power-up in case you've lost yours by getting hit throughout the level. When you make it over here to the left, we're going to grab another one of those heart containers so that we end up having full 5 hearts. Take out the gargoyle guy before attempting to make the jump over to the last platform here on the left to make it to the boss. Now this boss is another one that we're just going to kind of run up and just mash the attack button. He can even just walk into you if need be. You can just keep on attacking, and as long as you have full health going in, you really shouldn't have too much trouble. I usually like to come up with much better boss strategies, but other than the 1 heart double damage trick, which ends up being a lot more challenging since 1 hit you're going to end up being dead, the mash the attack button for most of the bosses is probably the best strat. Now we're in the final level of the game, the laboratory, though it's broken up into 3 different segments. We have our first segment, we'll face off with a boss, then continue facing off with the final boss, and then we have to actually escape the lab as it's breaking apart and exploding, and we have to do that within a time limit similar to a classic Metroid game. This level is very challenging, much more so than any of the other levels we've dealt with thus far. You have the spikes coming out of the ceiling and floor. You can thankfully duck underneath the spikes coming out of the ceiling, so you can at least avoid them, but if an enemy's tracking you down, like the robots, you'll end up probably getting hit as they're coming down. So I highly recommend taking out any robot enemy as soon as they end up spawning, and that way you don't have to deal with them in tighter areas. The only problem with those guys is they can be difficult to hit, like this one here, because the way he floats in, I have to kind of get in an awkward angle on the platforms in order to make sure I'm able to deliver damage. After avoiding that robot though, we're heading up the staircase here, take out this guy before continuing on over to the right, make some nicely timed jumps so that you don't end up hitting your head on any of the spikes. Thankfully, we have full health going into the next segment. We're going to take out this robot before we then go through the spike area. I always end up just ducking out of pure habit, even if I'm not in an area where spikes were going to end up coming out. Better, I guess, to be safe than sorry there. Get a couple more power-ups before entering into a cutscene and the next boss. This is where things get a lot trickier in the game. We're going to have to take out not one, but two bosses, so we have to conserve our health during the first fight. For this first battle, it's thankfully easy. You can easily jump his shockwaves that he sends out with his sword, and then deliver an attack. I recommend doing only one attack and then jumping away, but if you time it just right, you can actually get two attacks in before he's able to get his swing off. Our strategy for the second form, though, isn't quite as graceful. We're going to actually go in and try to take damage by doing jump attacks to him. Once we get the one heart left, we're going to quickly do two jump attacks, which should just barely be enough to take him out, so that we're able to move on to the next level. One thing cool with that boss, though, is he only has two attacks, the extended arm and then a big jump that he'll come leaping towards you. The good thing is, though, you can actually jump at the same time as him, and you'll go through him without getting hurt as long as you're both in the air. It's kind of just one of those weird missteps of the game programming, and you can use that to your advantage. Thankfully, even if you only have one heart at the end of the last boss fight, you'll have 3 hearts going into the next level, and there's another piece of heart right as we begin the next segment, so take out the gargoyle enemy and then grab that heart from the chest. Climb up the stairs and then climb up here, taking out the gargoyle. Be very careful of the spikes. This is an area that's very tricky to get around, not accidentally landing into them. Thankfully, we can grab a sword power-up. It's very difficult to get that chest up there. In fact, I don't know if I've ever really been able to. I assume it's a 1-up because they put 1-ups in the most unreachable places in this game, but I'm not positive on what's in that chest. Either way, we're going to climb up this staircase, grab this heart here so we're up to full health, jump onto this box, and we can use this as it's floating back and forth to get over to the right and quickly run and jump to the next platform before the ones we're on don't fall into the pit. This is by far the trickiest this game gets with platforming. Right here, it's almost impossible to make this jump without accidentally hitting those spikes. The good thing though is right after that, you can end up jumping up here and then getting your health back. Take out the flying helicopter before jumping into this segment. You have to be very careful of not only electricity, but of course the spikes. I usually get hit once during that segment, but thankfully this time I was able to get through it. Take out a few more enemies and just a couple more chests before we get a cutscene and the final boss of the game. As the final boss fight begins, the first form we're just going to run up and do double jump attacks in order to hit his face. Once we drained all the health of the first form, you should have 1, maybe 2 hearts left if you're really lucky. Thankfully, once the next fight begins though, we're just going to be able to do this since we have that double damage or triple damage with our attack here. We're going to immediately do a couple of attacks, then jump away from him, and if you do it right, you can cause the smoke he shoots out to follow you above him. This will allow us to quickly run under the smoke, do another double jump, and attack him again a couple of times in the face, finishing him off and getting to go to the last level. It's really hard as far as being able to actually dodge most of his attacks a lot of times, so really that ends up being one of your better bets as far as being able to just barely survive the fight. As the final level begins here, we have to escape the laboratory. There's a time limit in the lower right corner. It's a very strict one. You're going to pretty much need every second in order to get through this. Start off by immediately running across the top portion before jumping over to the left and dropping down the left opening here. Once you land safely, continue on down, and immediately once you get down the staircase, turn around and go to the left to the next screen. Here we're going to be able to drop on down and just barely grab onto this ledge, lifting ourselves up and continuing on. Thankfully you do get 2 hearts back before you end up beginning this whole segment, but there is no health replenishment during the course of the level, making it pretty tricky. After running back past where we fought the first set of bosses in Stage 6, this segment right here we're going to have to once again just wait and duck. You have to be very careful. You may want to go through this a little bit quicker than I am. One set of spikes you can at least get hit twice, so you can run through the smaller set of spikes that we're going to have to run past coming up in just a second. Drop on down here, going down a couple of sets of staircases. Once over here, this is the area you could technically just kind of run through this if you still have all 3 of your hearts. You'll take 2 damage, but at least you'll be able to get through and have a few seconds left. As you can see, the time is winding out as I finish up the level, and we can sit back and enjoy the ending, the Moon Crystal on the Famicom. So there you have it, Moon Crystal for the Famicom. This is a game that, like I said before, because of emulation, it's kind of gotten a cult following. It's a game that was immediately brought to my attention as far as import Famicom games was concerned, and one of the first ones that I ended up going out of my way to make sure I got. This is definitely one of those kind of middle-of-the-road NES experiences had it come to North America, but it probably would have been one of my favorites along the lines of Conquest of the Crystal Palace or an Astyonics style of game. As the credits finish up, we get one last little presented by Hect screen as the sky is shown above. But with that, guys, I'm going to wrap up this play it through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.